4-minute reply speech for their side. There are no points of information during reply speeches. Now, I invite the first speaker to cite the position.
Which purposes to control world trade and change the global power balance towards China. China plans to invest $900 billion into connecting Eurasian and African countries with China through 6 land-based economic corridors and an ocean-going maritime Silk Road. This is done by investing into expensive infrastructure projects in other nations. However, panel noticed that this is not a charity. For hosting nations, there are mainly 2 scenarios. Either if states find themselves in debt traps to the Chinese government, or if they have no hope of paying back a loan, they would have to give away their infrastructure to China, ports, roads, railways, or even their territory. Both of these options are horrific, and Team Estonia is very proud to regret the Belt and Road Initiative. But let's look at the alternatives without the Belt and Road Initiative. Most of these nations are emerging economies, and even without the Belt and Road Initiative, are experiencing economic growth and moving towards a positive direction. Ethiopia has 10 and Pakistan has 7% of GDP growth, and the same is in most of the nations that host the initiative. Now, the growth means that they're fine without China's investments in the long run, and will likely build the same scale infrastructure with their own capital without taking loans and giving away their infrastructure just after 50 years or so. But notice that there are also other alternatives, like international development banks or private capital that has always incentive to unlock the cheap workforce. So now our whole case for showing today why the initiative harms are much worse than waiting for these nations to get on their feet by themselves or with the help of other actors. This debate is not from the perspective of China nor the West, but rather this debate should be assessed from the global perspective. Today in my speech, firstly, I'm going to look at regional impacts, secondly, global impacts, and our second speaker will tell you about the risk of Belt and Road Initiative. Before we move on to my first argument,
do you think Donald Trump would provide better trade opportunities for Pakistan?
We believe that, of course, Pakistan has other trade opportunities rather than with China. We don't believe that China is the only one who is able to provide trade opportunities through the Belt and Road Initiative. But notice that we don't regret China doing bilateral agreements with separate states where states have the legitimacy to control them themselves. We just regret the initiative where these individual states have very little capability of deciding for the terms for themselves. But now, let's look at our first argument, how the initiative affects the host nations. States care mainly about 2 things, their sovereignty and their economic prosperity. Here are 3 reasons how the host nations' economies will be damaged. Firstly, China offers predatory loans to these nations, which means the high interest rates that drain these states' budgets are in place. China gave Sri Lanka a loan with an interest rate of 6.3%, while the interest rate in the World Bank and Asian Development Bank were only 3% for similar loans. So the unfair loans make states directly poorer in the long run. Second way how it harms their economy is that China takes hold of their infrastructure and hence damaging them. Sri Lanka had to hand away their port to the Chinese government for 100 years due to great debt. Look, this means that Sri Lanka has spent a lot of money in the port and has now no benefit from it at all. Furthermore, China now dictates what products flow through these ports, roads, and railways. So it prioritizes China's nations and firm interests instead of bringing these states benefits. China is currently bringing in her manufactured goods, while the Sri Lankan economy actually needs raw materials so desperately. China also does this in other countries like Pakistan and Kazakhstan, and the states are unable to benefit from the infrastructure that they were built, hence leaving them in debt just to serve the interests of another nation. Now, third and last reason of how their economy will be damaged is that the initiative influences local markets and manufacturers very negatively. Belt and Road Initiative makes cheap Chinese goods more accessible in these nations, which means that these nations' own products often can't compete, and local sectors and companies are pushed out of the market. Madagascar's textile industry suffered after Chinese companies started exporting their own product into Madagascar through the Belt and Road Initiative. So the impact is that it can come close to China, and the local people are left poor and jobless even more than they were before the initiative. We have shown you that this is destructive to their economy, but let's look at how it affects their sovereignty. States are dependent on China and foreign governments, and this limits their own decision making. Because Chinese people already influence their interstate decision through the immense lobby power that they have. Chinese business people lobby for their decisions in their interests, but there are more of them due to the increased business of China now with the Belt and Road Initiative. In Kazakhstan, the only kindergarten in the area was shut down due to Chinese government lobby in order for Chinese workers working on a Belt and Road Initiative project for building them a hostel, so the kindergarten was closed. And they must also take Chinese sides on other issues in foreign policy. China can now influence other nations to support its actions in the territorial disputes because they're economically dependent on China. China offered development aid to Brunei and Laos so it could support its controversial actions militarily seizing other nations' territories in South China Sea in order for them to get development aid. So this means the smaller states are afraid of angering China and hence they obey. So this allows more countries China to exercise an aggressive foreign policy that they already have an incentive to do that right now. But now let me move on to my second argument that describes the global impacts of China expanding their power. Military expansion is an inherent part of the Belt and Road Initiative. The reason why China is willing to execute a project that's so expensive and yet likely to fail is because it enables them to expand their power militarily. China needs to protect these economic routes and guarantee the stability on the way. So China has already said that in order for a port in Djibouti that they build to work, they need to keep their military present in order to protect it. So they have already created this in Djibouti. They have brought into Pakistan 150,000 troops, special security division to protect the road. And they have plans to build military bases in Afghanistan, in Poland, and they're likely to build more bases all over the world once the initiative advances. Two very destructive impacts from that when China builds these bases. Firstly, it raises tensions, and secondly, it increases the risk of a direct military conflict. Firstly, it raises tensions because political tensions emerge because other nations are very unlikely to support China militarily expanding.
America has over 800 military bases stationed all outside its own territory, including Guam and South Korea. So why should America be allowed to do that and not China?
Sure, I got your point. We believe that yes, USA has already very many military bases. However, the less military bases you have in the world, especially from conflicting powers, the more security you have. And this is exactly what I'm talking about right now. So firstly, political tensions are likely to increase because other nations are not very happy when China builds their bases. Vietnam and China already have tensions due to China expanding their influence in the South China Sea. So that means less cooperation between the states, economically and politically, possibly meaning sanctions and inability to solve regional problems together. But furthermore, it increases the risk of a direct military conflict, something that the POI is answering to. In South China Seas, China often sends its warship to counter foreign forces. USA is protecting their bases in Guam, and China is likely to do that with other bases also. The more military bases next to each other with armed soldiers, the likely is a skirmish or a military accidental conflict between them. So panel, the Belt and Road Initiative is only beneficial for China and very destructive for little nations and also the whole world because it doesn't bring security. For all these reasons, I beg you to propose.
aftermath of World War II, with Europe crippled by war, the United States stepped up and provided billions of infrastructure investment in a plan known as the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan reinvigorated the economies of these countries, strengthened alliances between the US and Europe, including military alliances, and resulted in a global trade order led by the United States. We say it's time for a 21st century Marshall Plan led by the 21st century's preeminent power, China. Developing countries in South and Central Asia have for decades been left behind by a Western economic order that has only prioritized developmental aid for those countries which they have a strategic interest in. This has meant that infrastructure spending and the economies of those countries, like Pakistan and Myanmar, have regressed while the West continues to prosper. What we support on our side of the house is the Belt and Road Initiative, the development strategy proposed by the Chinese government, which focuses on connectivity and cooperation between Eurasian countries, primarily the land-based Silk Road economic belt and the maritime Silk Road. Our burden in today's debate is twofold. A, that China is a legitimate actor to engage in these actions, and B, that the benefits of the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, while not perfect, are greater than the harms. We have three arguments to bring the House to do that. Firstly, why the BRI countries are better off aligning themselves with China than with the West or with no one. Secondly, why the BRI reduces the odds of military tension. And then an argument from Nick about why the Belt and Road Initiative facilitates increased competition which assists developing countries. But let's deal with the case brought to us by the opposition. Because what they wanted to tell us was the alternative for these countries was some sort of natural growth, and these countries were doing fine anyway because Pakistan's GDP is on the rise. The fact of the matter is, Pakistan is only experiencing GDP growth because China has been investing in it in the Belt and Road Initiative. And the fact that it has a GDP of less than $1,500 US per capita shows that there is an inability for them to do that on their own. The alternative for these people is subsistence farming and abject poverty. We don't think that's something you can stand for in today's debate. It was quite telling when they said there were other trade opportunities which they could have. This is simply false. No country wants to trade with like Tajikistan except for China because it has a road to Europe. There is no incentive for the West to develop that area. Their first argument about regional impacts. Firstly, they wanted to tell us about predatory loans. We think that the conditions set by these loans are particularly fair, especially when reflecting the risk China has put into investing into these countries that might not yield profit. Their argument about debt-to-equity swaps. We tell you firstly that this is a small minority of cases. The studies have shown this is only a risk in 8 out of the 63 Belt and Road countries. But secondly, that these countries still get the benefits from these things. So say there was a like hydropower dam that China did a debt for equity swap. Citizens of that country still get the power from that dam, even though China owns it. The third sub-point in this point about China dictating which products go through the ports, like in Madagascar. We say that this is not usually the case, such as in the Gwadar port in Pakistan, where Pakistan is able to put its own goods through. But even in so it is that Madagascar gets raw materials from China, and that's good for them as well. Their second argument about global impacts. They told you that these countries wouldn't have much, would be aligned with China in all their foreign policy, and that's fair. We think the reality is these countries don't have much territorial power anyway, and perhaps it's probably good for them to have an ally that is powerful in the first place. But then when they told us that they'd raised tensions because of military bases, we think it was quite telling that in response to our point of information, they supported the US global hegemony over international military alliances. We say that on the counterfactual, China will still always pursue strategic interests. It is not that by removing the Belt and Road Initiative, you get rid of all the incentives for China to develop militarily. So they don't solve that anyway. And we will prove why we actually de-escalate tensions in the South China Sea later in my argument. First argument then, why BRI countries are better off aligning themselves with China than with the West. Recognize that these nations often find it very difficult to attract investment from the West, because the West's investment is tied purely to its geopolitical goals. That's why we saw the United States investing in South America, because they helped reduce the global war on drugs, and that directly helped America. But states like Kazakhstan are of no relevance to America whatsoever. They're on the complete other side of the globe. But even in the rare situations, if they did invest in these countries, we think that governments and organizations like the International Monetary Fund often attach policy changes as conditions for these loans, and these are terrible. You see rapid liberalization and privatization of markets. This allows for the West to sweep up the resources in these countries at a fraction of their true value. You also see policies made with that to cut government spending, which has literally destroyed healthcare systems in Africa. We don't think that's something proposition could stand for. But the West is also turning increasingly inward. We see Trump pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement and the rise of nationalism in Europe, meaning these people are unable to provide an alternative for these countries to attract investment. In this context, why is the Belt and Road Initiative so beneficial to these countries? For two reasons. First, because China has interests in different areas than the West. For example, as I talked about in Kazakhstan, because it's their geographical route to put a trade route to Europe. But secondly, that the West has different allies that it won't invest in transformational infrastructure in Pakistan because Pakistan has a conflict with India, and the West will never invest in the enemy of their ally. At the end of this point, what do we get for the people actually living on the ground in those countries? We get employment for these people. So when we saw the Carrot hydropower project in Pakistan, the Chinese company building the dam hired thousands of local workers from rural areas and created spin-off jobs in local industries and maintenance jobs on that dam. This means that the Pakistani farmers that previously wouldn't have any opportunity to better themselves now do. I'll take a go now.
These people have no use of these creating jobs when their own economy, their own sectors of manufacture are pushed out of the market due to these cheap Chinese goods. You never answered to this point.
Okay, firstly, that's not a reality in today's fair. It's not like their economy is suddenly shut down. But secondly, that they can get employed in the Chinese industries as well. We also provide industry, so the Pakistan's poor areas now no longer get 20-hour blackouts, and now people actually have an ability to get power and live their economies up. Second argument, while BRI reduces the odds of military tension. Because while China is not as historically imperialistic as it once was never historically imperialistic, there is tension in the South China Sea. BRI reduces this tension in two ways. Because China is more interdependent on the global economy, more of their GDP is reliant on global trades, they're less likely to engage with tensions as a result. And secondly, because it reduces tensions around trade routes in the South China Sea. Because the comparative on their side is that over 60% of their trade goes through that area, making it a hotspot for military tension. We fix that problem, we don't get the tension, we de-escalate military tensions on our side of the house. The BRI is the best way to secure these countries and these people, giving them a chance at a real chance at life. Proud to close.
concede to the opposition to some extent. We might concede to the fact that Chinese investments might bring initial benefits to these countries. But notice that we are debating this debate in the long-term perspective. We are going to tell you how all of these countries are going to be harmed in the long term and how their case doesn't deal with those factors and how they don't deal with the fact that these countries will be worse off in 10, 20 or 50 years. In this speech, first I'm already with 2 points rebuttal to that case, then moving on to revealing and telling you exactly how in the long term all of these countries will be worse, and then telling you how their case acts on the assumption that the Belt and Road Initiative is actually successful, and in the case where it isn't, those countries will be harmed even more. Starting with rebuttals. What we haven't done is that there is time for a new Marshall Plan. Notice that this framework doesn't really apply to the Belt and Road Initiative. China isn't providing development aid. China isn't trying to build these countries up. China is trying to make sure that they can have more leverage in those countries, and they can have more dominance in the whole world, and trying to make sure that they can have infrastructure in many countries where they don't have it at the moment. China is increasing its military power and not trying to build these countries up. We don't think that this is equivalent to the Marshall Plan. The typical more jobs will be created in those countries. Two responses to this. Firstly, notice that many of the construction workers that China is currently using are actually Chinese. China has an overload, has a surplus of people, and they are trying to go work into other countries so that people aren't simply sitting idly. Moreover, notice that other investors could also go into those countries because they have private profit incentives, because of the cheap workforce in those nations. They would be using the people in those places, and they would actually be creating more jobs, something that China doesn't actually do because they can use their own cheap workforce, something that's more beneficial for them. We don't think that these people in those countries actually get benefits. They then tell you that economic interdependence creates less military conflicts. I'm going to answer this now. Firstly, I think that this argument simply doesn't stand because of the fact that economic benefits from China under the Belt and Road Initiative inherently come with some kind of military impact. China goes to those places and builds bases in those countries when they are trying to make something economic happen in those places. They are increasing the chance of military conflict happening by building bases in Djibouti, by getting 150,000 troops into Pakistan. They go in with military and not only economy, so I think that this argument falls at its assumption. Furthermore, now it has an incentive to protect all of the things that it has with military. It has an incentive to try to protect them at all costs and try to use this military, something that it didn't have before. But finally, noting this is not an inherently true theory. China already has lots of economic relations with Vietnam, for example, but it's still bombing their ships in the South China Sea. I think the economic dependence doesn't always mean that military conflicts don't exist, and they need to prove to you how under the status quo that logic applies. Moving on to reading. Firstly, telling about regional impact on an economic level. We get a few answers from side oppositions. If I tell you that they don't always go to China and that some things are that always these infrastructure projects don't go to China. Those in many instances they do because of the fact these loans are predatory. Even if it doesn't happen in the first years of owning that infrastructure project, then in the end you simply don't have enough money to pay for China, and you're forced to give your port way, for example, because you can't pay back the loans. These loans are predatory, as I first speaker told you, and they don't give a response to that. Secondly, they say that some citizens benefit from the fact that there is a hydroelectric plant in the country. Notice that on some side they might do that, but eventually they simply don't have the funds to maintain those things. The loans that China is giving them are enough at the moment to keep that plant working, but in the end those loans simply run out. Those countries can't afford it anymore because they're so far in debt. In those instances, those people don't get those benefits anymore, and they need to deal with the long-term impact. Finally, they said you can also get raw materials from China. They aren't responding to our argument. We take it home, it's not beneficial for China to give raw materials and they only want to give products. This means that China never caters to what these countries need, but only what they need, and thus those countries don't actually get any benefits. Which means that in the long term, all of these things will be worse for these countries, because this infrastructure won't be beneficial for them, and for future sustainability, you always need China, which is not going to be there in the long run. China is going to take these things away because these countries can't afford the loans that China is giving out for them, and these countries are simply wasting money they could have used for local development, as we are telling you that they have this money to some extent already. They are wasting money to pay for these predatory loans that China is giving to them, and China is enslaving them in some kind of debt trap. Second point revealed, how these countries have less sovereignty. They don't actually provide you an argument, any rebuttal concerning this argument. They never tell you how these countries can maintain a level of sovereignty, how they can still make the decisions for themselves. But so China is using their lobby power to influence the decisions these countries are making, to force them to give their infrastructure to China, and to make foreign policy decisions that only benefit China. They are forcing countries to make harmful economic decisions for themselves, and in the end, it will be worse for these countries that they are so hard trying to protect. Before moving on to my final point of view, go.
There's still a choice for these countries to accept these loans, given that they still have internal domestic pressures not to accept the types of crippling debt loans that simply sell their sovereignty away. Why is that not enough to provide the counterfactual for the vast majority of countries in this space?
So it's easy for them. They can simply take these loans and make something better for the instant, but they aren't taking into consideration the fact these loans are predatory and won't be able to pay these things back. They don't have to provide to any human rights levels, for example. They simply take this money and run with it. Final point about global military expansion. It has to say that China will still have those incentives, and we might agree. We think that the Belt and Road Initiative, however, provides an excellent opportunity for China to make all of those military incentives become true. Furthermore, they don't answer the point about tensions, how we are going to have more tensions under their side of the house. They tell you how the United States currently has hegemony in the military sphere, and we can agree to that. But we think it's worse if we have two competing powers with very competing incentives and agendas. I think we're going to have more tensions and more skirmishes under their side of the house, and that's going to be a huge harm under their side. All of these countries will harm from the fact when the whole world is in shambles because of the fact that we have two major superpowers competing with each other. Now finally, moving on to my argument. This argument will prove to you how the Belt and Road Initiative is likely to fail because it's a huge risk and the negative impact that derive from the Belt and Road Initiative actually failing. Firstly, a few reasons why it might fail. Next, there is no cooperation from Western nations. Nobody from Europe turned up to the Belt and Road meeting, and there is a strong US opposition to the whole plan. There is also a lack of cooperation from many non-Western nations. Bangladesh, for example, chose a Japanese wheel over a Chinese one when immediately imported in their capital, something that's really important for the Belt and Road Initiative to succeed. These countries are often corrupt. Afghanistan is fourth to last in the corruption index, and also the worst of US bringing to corruption between 2004 and 2010. Finally, there is massive backlash from the people. A Chinese gold processing plant was set on fire in the south of Kyrgyzstan because of the fact that these people know what's happening to their countries, what's harming their economies and their sovereignty. This is harmful for the Belt and Road Initiative because it means that it's more likely to fail. In the instance where China can't build the infrastructure necessary for the Belt and Road Initiative, and this means that they can't actually make all of these economic trade routes happen. They also can't have cooperation with the West, thus the main objective of China accessing the Western market won't be achieved with the Belt and Road Initiative. This proves that the Belt and Road Initiative won't be as successful as they want it to be, thus won't actually benefit China and the host nations. Why? Firstly, China is going to go into massive bouts of recession. We have given out many non-performing loans and lost billions of dollars because of this. The companies that could previously sell their products thanks to the Belt and Road Initiative are stuck with the surplus of products that China currently has. They will be economically stagnated because of the fact that products are flowing out of the country but staying inside, and China won't be able to keep up with the economic recession that they're in. But moreover, the partner nations will have huge loans with no benefit. Ports can for huge volumes of Chinese goods which are very important. They will rely heavily on Chinese loans to make their country work, but these loans are given out anymore because China can't afford it. The Belt and Road Initiative is very likely to be unsuccessful, and in that instance, none of these countries that they are trying to protect will benefit. Ladies and gentlemen, the Belt and Road is predatory and only abuses this country in any two.
Team Estonia may blindly guide into President Trump's China bashing, but let's have a reality check at this point in the debate. Because what has the West done for countries like Myanmar, like Pakistan, like Kazakhstan? What have those countries themselves done for their infrastructure? The answer is a negligible amount, enough that these countries are languishing in poverty, languishing behind the West and the types of countries that the West has chosen through their own strategic interests to engage in. That is the reality in this debate. That there are countries that the West has left behind and that had, through China's investment, are now getting infrastructure that they never had under their side of the house. I'm going to bring a single argument about why the BRI facilitates increased competition which assists developing countries. But firstly, I have 2 points of clash to address. Firstly, the impact on BRI countries, and secondly, the impact on global community and tensions. So firstly, let's have a look at the impact on BRI countries. Because we both agree in this debate that China isn't simply doing this for altruistic reasons. So then let's move on to whether or not it actually benefited the countries in this debate. Because what we told you at first was that the difference in this debate is that countries like Pakistan and like Myanmar literally have telecommunication lines. The people who were previously living in blackouts for 20 hours a day now have electricity which can power their farm equipment, now have electricity which can burgeon their industries and actually mean that they can have forms of employment outside of simply rural agriculture or the types of things that have constrained them to languishing behind all of these other countries. So what did we hear from Team Estonia in this debate? They told us that there were predatory loans, and they couldn't really decide whether they wanted these countries to build an infrastructure themselves or whether they wanted to have them get loans from the IMF. Firstly, in terms of whether they wanted to get loans from other types of actors in this debate, we want to say that this is a regrets debate, which means that Team Estonia actually needs to engage in realistic counterfactuals. And the counterfactual in this debate is that the IMF has not invested in these countries. That the IMF invests insofar as that it is important and it is strategic for the West's geopolitical incentives. We told you that there was no incentive for the IMF to ever invest, and even if they did, it is often accompanied by the things such as economic liberalisation, through which the West can crowbar their way in and enter into the economies of their countries. So we don't think the IMF is this perfect actor in this debate that they can stand behind under their side of the rules. Furthermore, we told you that these loans in actuality were very fair, that many of these countries do enter into the types of loans where they know what they are getting into, and the majority of the countries, in fact, over 55 of the 63 countries, have actually not entered excess to have any risk of not being able to pay those loans back. So what did they want to tell us? They wanted to tell us that they wanted these countries to build their infrastructure on their own. Let's be clear. When Pakistan has a GDP of less than 1,500 per capita, that is a sign that they can't build their own infrastructure. The types of massive economic growth that Pakistan has seen comes as a direct result of the type of investment that the Belt and Road Initiative have brought. The types of high-speed transport infrastructure and highway networks that have allowed them to get their goods right throughout Asia and across the world. The types of ports like Gwadar that have allowed them to actually access European markets. Because unlike what you might believe if you were listening to Team Estonia, it is not an exclusive right for China to use these ports. They can be used by the entire economy. So secondly, they told us they enter into debt for equity shares, and this is bad for those countries. Firstly, we tell you in many cases China doesn't do this. They actually enter into debt relief things such as stretching loans for these countries. Secondly, there is large internal domestic pressure not to accept bad deals. There are local politicians who are seen as being selling their sovereignty away if they do indeed grant China access to these ports. The fact that they have to lean so heavily on one single example where one Sri Lankan politician was able to be coerced by China into forgiving that port away where they couldn't meet their loans isn't indicative of the wider picture in today's debate, which is when countries do have incentives to maintain their own sovereignty. Finally, to tell you, even in the worst case scenario, if we take them at their best and tell you that they do exchange things for equity, these countries still gain the benefits, right? Because even if they take control of a dam, the electricity from that dam still flows to Pakistani homes. It's not like China that controls the hegemony of that dam and then prevents the benefits of that from ever flowing down to the people that we wanted to help in this debate. Finally, they told us that local workers are pushed out. Firstly, we tell you that often the terms of these conditions are negotiated so that local workers do actually build the infrastructure in the first place, such as the dam in Pakistan. But secondly, we tell you that there are additional jobs brought to that country, which far outweigh the actual number of people building that dam or building that infrastructure in the first place. So if you think about it, when you build a dam, it's not simply the builders that may be brought in from China, it is the local concrete industry, it is the local people who are then employed to maintain that dam in the long term. It's the people who can build industry off the back of that. Finally, they wanted to say that local manufacturers are pushed out. Look, we're happy to say that there can be anti-dumping laws in that scenario, but furthermore we tell you that often in these countries they're able to have a comparative advantage in what they do produce, and that can contain and maintain into the future. What did we hear from the second speaker? He wanted to essentially say that there was backlash and we were going to make it way, way worse for China in this debate. They were going to enter into voucher recession. Look, we're actually very happy for China themselves to be able to weigh up the risk. We tell you we benefit people, especially in West China, who are able to now get that types of infrastructure investment. Secondly, let's have a look at the impact on global community and tensions. Because let's build on what was brought to us at our first speaker about the tensions in the South China Sea. Because the reason that there are tensions in the South China Sea is because it represents the only trade route that China can get all of its goods to European and Asian markets. What does this mean? It means that above all else, it needs to have military pressure try and exert its control and influence in that region. We told you that the types of things that can prevent that are when China has alternatives where they can ship its goods through other ways. They wanted to say that they wanted to build bases, and they thought that China wanted to build bases, and that was really damaging. We told you at the point where they were supporting a US global hegemony in this debate. We said that it was perfectly legitimate for China to pursue its own strategic interests, and that it would continue to do so under either side of the house in this debate. So now let's move on to my point about why the BRI facilitates increased competition which assists developing countries for first years.
China is building a highway in Montenegro, the cost of which is 80% of that country's GDP. Montenegro have to pay a majority of the cost of that highway themselves. How is Montenegro going to essentially duplicate their GDP, and why wouldn't that money have been used better?
Firstly, I dispute your claim that it is 80% of GDP, and secondly, we tell you that even insofar as it is a large percentage of GDP, quite clearly, A, Montenegro knew what they were getting into, and B, the types of investment and infrastructure that they can have in terms of actually being able to access outside markets is far better than the alternative in this debate, which is no investment. So now let's move on to my point, because understand that Western aid, or the US aid, constantly seeks to advance its own geopolitical objectives. However, this is often accompanied by onerous conditions such as policy reform or opening up the country to Western investors. Right now, Western powers have essentially no one else to compete with them in giving loans to these countries. This allows them to attach these types of strings and actually mean they try to force these countries into policy change. In this context, the BRI improves these countries in two ways. First, because the West can no longer afford to not give aid to these countries. Because the West does not want to have stronger ties to these countries, even if those ties are purely commercial. This is because the West does not want to exert the type of diplomatic influence that it can if it does have the exclusive rights. So as a result, countries that previously didn't get aid from the West will now have access to aid. This looks like the USA actually paying attention to what happens in places like Kyrgyzstan and Central Asia. But secondly, the West must also give better conditions on those loans. That means instead of having these types of incentives where they have to liberalise their markets, the West now has to give better conditions, like not high interest rates, not trying to change the policies of those countries to compete with China. For example, when push came to shove recently for an internet cable linking Australia to the Solomon Islands, the Australian government, instead of allowing the Chinese company Huawei to invest in that, they were the ones who footed that $200 million bill and actually made that investment. They're incentivized to do that under outside of the house. At the end of this debate, we're a side that picks up nations who for far too long have been ignored by the West. We benefit the people of those nations. We're very, very proud to be those.
proposition to deliver their speech.
Honourable panel, we in Team Estonia believe that the Belt and Road Initiative is using and abusing all of the countries that are actually involved with this policy. We think that China is tempting these countries with quick and easy solutions and quick and easy loans, which other more legitimate institutions or institutions that don't want to take such a high risk won't give to them. But we think that all of these loans have hidden harms that actually these countries don't take into account, and we think that this is the reason why we should regret this. I want to talk about three main things in my speech. First, I want to look at how trade is going to be influenced in these countries. Secondly, I want to look at the human impact in this debate and how we'll try and become more militaristic. And then lastly, I'm going to give you a comparison of the arguments that both of the teams have presented in show you why we have won. So first off, how is trade going to be influenced? We were told that we were given this characterization that Asian countries have been left behind and that Pakistan is only growing because of China. Well, actually, foreign direct investment in many countries is greater, for example, the Netherlands than China. This is true in many of China's neighbours. China is usually the fourth to like the seventh largest spender in these countries, which means it is obviously isn't true their characterization. Before the Belt and Road Initiative, China was also like still trading, and a number of other countries were still trading, but all these countries still had some sort of autonomy over what this trade should look like, and China couldn't tell them what sort of trade they should be doing, and they didn't have control over large and very important infrastructure in these countries. We think there obviously is spending, but in the cases where there isn't some sort of spending or some sort of loan giving, it is obviously because the risk is too large for more legitimate investors to actually take. No one decides not to trade with China because of some sort of neo-colonial spite. Private investors don't want to take that huge risk of these loans. However, China is willing to take that loss, as they will just take over these infrastructure projects. It isn't a loss for China, no thank you. This is also the reason why predatory loans are so beneficial for China, because at best these countries will just have to pay off these loans and have incredible debt, and if they don't, then China can take these infrastructure projects and use them to increase their own economic benefits. No thank you. Also, note that they didn't bring any sort of statistic on proving how these loans aren't predatory. We did, and we think that these aren't very fair. But now, when they talk about the fact that it's good when Madagascar gets more trade, then we think that this is very good analysis. Obviously, we talked about the fact that local industry is disrupted in these countries, which is much worse. For example, Madagascar's textile industry was completely disrupted and almost lost because of China's incoming imports, which Madagascar now couldn't say no to, which means that obviously Madagascar's own economy, or at least the people in Madagascar who are also important in this debate, were suffering, and they were the ones being harmed, and only larger companies in China were getting the benefit, and we don't think that this is that is very justified. Yes.
Do you think that it will actually help grow Madagascar's industry at the point in time when they have a port that allows raw materials from China to go into their country?
Well, yeah, but the problem is that Madagascar can't dictate what sort of materials it needs. We talked about this in our first speech, about the fact how Sri Lanka needs raw materials, but it's getting manufactured goods, which isn't actually beneficial for Sri Lanka. And if they dictate and add more autonomy, then they can get more benefits, which is obviously better on our side. We also give you a lot of analysis, in our second speech, about why the Belt and Road Initiative is likely to fail, about how there's no cooperation from Western nations, how there's also lack of cooperation from non-Western nations, where partner nations fail to pay back loans, corruption, and also local backlash because of because sovereignty is being infringed upon in all of these cases. We also we don't really get a response into the fact why it is justified also for China to infringe upon these countries' sovereignty so much. This is a huge one we haven't really answered to. That these countries now can't dictate what for example what their overall foreign policies, and we increase the amount that Chinese lobbyists can actually use. Something that this is an incredible harm also in itself. No, thank you. But now let's move on to this point about what are the overall human impacts and how does China become more militaristic. They also talk about the fact that people still get the hydropower now anyway, and that people get jobs as well. But as we said, often these people don't get jobs. We think often these projects take in China's workers, which means there isn't very much human benefit in these places. We don't understand how many Pakistani farmers can become hydropower engineers, right? This is their characterization of how they're solving this problem. We don't really agree with this, and we don't think that the overall people can get as many jobs as they're talking about. No, thank you. But then they talk about the fact that now let's talk about military and show you why actually China is more likely to become militaristic. They bring out two reasons why it isn't. Firstly, that now China is more economically tied to all sorts of different countries. This doesn't work in the South China Seas. China is still tied to all of those countries, but is still willing to be militaristic and show their own military power, because this way is more economically beneficial for them. They don't need to go to war for them. They only need to bully these countries with their overall much larger navy, just so that they can have more beneficial overall trading and get more power over the South China Sea. We also think that our own argument talks about why economic ties always lead to increased militarism in the case of China. We brought you 3 examples about how there is a Djibouti military base, how Pakistan has 150,000 troops in them, and there are planned bases for Afghanistan and Poland. When they say that China still has the incentive for all of these things, then this isn't true. How will China justify a military base if it doesn't even have any sort of trading routes there, or if it doesn't even have any sort of trading business there? We don't think that they can justify it. We don't think there's an incentive for China to increase their militarism around the world. We think that we've talked about this quite a lot. But the second point that they talk about militarism is that now the South China Sea is less important. I mean, this just isn't true. The South China Sea will always be a huge trade route with unexplored oil and gas. Also, we think that this is true that China now won't care about it. We think that they'll stay the same. No, thank you. But now on their extension, that countries that previously didn't get aid now will. We don't understand what countries they're talking about. They give no characterization of those. No, thank you. But we think that now these countries are less likely to accept aid, which often come with human rights conditions with them, because now they can get very easy loans from China, which means that it's more likely actually that they don't have to accept the aid. And we probably think that if these loans do fall down, no thank you, then our own harms of these countries overall getting worse are going to be heightened. But now let's look at the comparative of what is actually happening. They say that China gives a lot of money to build roads and ports. We think this might all be fine. We think this money is abusive politically, economically, and militarily. For example, politically, why our comparative wins is that a good economy only leads to real human benefits if you have good politics behind them. If you don't have some sort of Chinese investors telling you, or lobbyists telling you that you have to lower your taxes, for example, or you have to make your kindergarten into a hostel, because then it just doesn't have to translate into human benefits. When we talk about the economy, then we say that money at the moment, with these loans, it would be wasted on paying back Chinese debt, which could have been used for sustainable development, for example, or they also lessen the ability of these countries to, in the future, invest in much more better infrastructure projects that might not be so risky, or that this disrupts the overall local economy from production with a large influx of Chinese trade, which means that in the long run, it will be much harder for these countries to actually bounce back and actually get some sort of more aid. For the fact that this Chinese lobby power forces states to undertake unfavourable economic policies, which will also, in the long run, make it harder for these countries to actually have good economic policies and actually benefit from the overall growth of the economy. For all of these reasons, I'm very proud of the post. Thank you.
What Team Estonia has forgotten is that 20 years ago, the economies of Eurasia were suffering. In countries like Myanmar, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, communities relied on subsistence farming. They had no power, and they had no way to mobilize themselves. Now, these communities have access to resources that they never would have otherwise, and they're seeing the greatest growth in their country's histories since the Silk Road. These are the communities that Team New Zealand is lifting out of abject poverty, and these are the communities that are helped by the Belt and Road Initiative. 3 questions then in this debate. First of all, do countries accept terrible deals? Second of all, what are the impacts on those developing economies? And thirdly, we're going to look at the impact of military tension with China in regards to other countries. So firstly, let's look at whether or not countries accept terrible deals. Because the only line we heard from Estonia was the assumption that politicians took deals blindly, that they just shut their eyes until whatever deal came their way because they weren't accountable to everyone. We say that given the fact that Estonia conceded that these nations are burgeoning democracies, those loans. So how does that work? Well, what we say is that in these countries like Pakistan, many of the politicians actually run an anti-corruption, anti-steal and our sovereign platform. That's what we have the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, running on that platform. That's what we have Malaysia's President Mohammed running against their sovereignty being stolen. What that means is that those politicians are disinclined from taking horrible deals, especially given the fact that those countries are still recovering from having their resources ripped away by British colonialism. It means that public is particularly pro-sovereignty and particularly going to push away from the deals that they feel threaten them. What does that mean? It means that they're unlikely to accept those deals. Furthermore, we see that China cares a great deal about its international image, which means it's unlikely to offer those horrible deals in the first place. What we say is it's not enough for them to talk about a single country where China forced a hospital to close, but that is an extreme minority of cases. Instead, we say that China has huge incentives to look good on the global platform, given the power vacuum created by the declining West and EU. What that means is that, given the fact that we have far-right politicians like Jaroslaw Kaczynski in Poland and Viktor Orban in Hungary, what that means is that there's a huge position for China to be a good actor on the world stage. What that means is they have incentives to make those deals less terrible. Further, we say that there's a huge media market in these countries when there's a huge amount of infrastructure being put on, which means that those countries' deals, they're put under a huge amount of media scrutiny that is shown to the entire world. What that means is that insofar as they accept horrible deals, those politicians look bad and China looks bad. That means that they have little reason to go for those deals. Further, in terms of simply importing workers, we say first of all that it's actually very expensive for China to import all of their workers to all of these other countries in terms of maintaining maintenance for the next 20 years. We say it's unrealistic for China to hope to put their own workers to work at that. It's a lot easier actually for them to rely on the local workers. But further, given that people are pro-sovereignty, they're going to put pressure on their local politicians to only accept the deals that actually employ them. That's why in countries like Malaysia, they were able to turn down military bases that didn't employ Malaysian workers, but were able to accept the deals that provided jobs to those people. At the end of this point, we see that countries do not accept terrible deals, and even if they did, we're able to get these sorts of industries that are actually valuable to lifting people out of poverty. So what then is the impact on developing economies? Here, I want to say the huge tension that existed in Estonia's case all down their line, because they told you that they were happy to have private investors. They were happy to have the IMF be a Western crowbar and buying up the institutions that were so valuable to those countries. But then they also wanted to say in the same breath that the most important thing was the sovereignty of those countries. We think that they cannot support private investors buying up valuable institutions while also saying that the most important thing was sovereignty. We think that is something that they cannot accept in this debate. What we told you is that this gives these economies an opportunity for development. Insofar as they want to say that they can simply build themselves up, they need to engage with the reality in this debate, because the fact is that if they did want to build up those industries, the fact that these countries were poor 20 years ago means that they have extremely limited capital to put into developing those industries. What that means is that maybe they do build a port, maybe they do build a single rail line. What that means is that it comes at the expense of a huge amount of social services that government will be providing at the same time. So what we say then is that it's very difficult for those countries to develop their own infrastructure, so it's much preferable to rely on China. We think we've done enough down our line to show you why the International Monetary Fund is obviously not a viable option for China or for these countries to take. What did they then tell you? That China is going to control everything and insert their own industries. Let's be very clear in this debate. China may have a steel surplus, right? But the issue is that Pakistan is always going to have a comparative advantage in some fields over China. It's not the case that China can simply import every single thing that they want out of those countries, insofar as China obviously relies on a few industries that countries like Pakistan and Myanmar do not have. What we say is that this actually opens up countries to importing their goods and exporting them. What we say is that in Pakistan, the railways actually gave access to Asian markets that they wouldn't before. It's not enough for them to simply say that they can just trade, because the issue is that you cannot trade with Asia if you have no infrastructure to do so, if you have no train to literally bring your goods to the rest of Asia. We are the team that actually provides those rail lines and opens up their economy. Further, we say that ports give access to European markets. Is that it isn't the case that Europe is simply going to buy things from China, because if they did, they'd be doing that under the status quo. The comparative is that we actually give access to European markets because Europe wants to buy goods from Pakistan, from Myanmar. What that means is that Myanmar can rely on their own industries and create a huge amount of development there. Yes?
China is not building any industries or jobs in these nations. Rather, they produce the goods still in China and sell them to these nations, pushing local local manufacture and industries out of these nations.
Okay, that wasn't a question, that was just a statement. But further, we said that the Gwadar port actually employed 3,000 Pakistanis to do the work because China saw that it was cheaper to simply employ those local individuals. We say that they do have trade, that they are able to work on those deals. And so far, is that they want to talk about the Madagascar port. The problem is that China dictating the sole purpose of those ports isn't actually how trade works, right? Countries choose what they buy, which means that those countries will likely choose to buy things from European markets. We say that they do get growth. No, thank you. Further, we say that we actually heard no sufficient response to Nick's split, which is that the US is actually going to compete on aid if they see that China is becoming a global power. We say when the US actually provides greater help to those countries, that's how they develop. And we say that the fact that it was unresponded to is extremely detrimental. So how then do we increase or decrease military tension? They told you that China doesn't have to rely. Oh, we told you that China doesn't have to rely now on tense routes like the South China Sea. They told you that China will still become reliant on that. What we say is that that's literally incorrect. As we point out, the Eurasian land bridge and the Arctic route are the biggest infrastructure things that China has ever planned in the last 50 years. What it means is that it's obviously clear that China doesn't necessarily have to rely on the South China Sea as they did before. And so far, as they do have increased militarization, we see that a lot of these countries are actually nuclearized, right? Which means that it's not likely that China is suddenly going to go to war with India. And so far as they both have nuclear weapons, and they see it as a lose-lose game. What that means is that it's okay for China to have military bases. We say that it's not enough for them to simply say that less military bases is a good thing. It's not realistic to simply demilitarize the world. What instead is realistic to do is provide infrastructure to the communities that need it most and actually help these developing countries crawl their way out of the ground. Very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the third speaker of the position for their speech and would like to invite the reply speaker of the position to deliver their speech.
Team Estonia lived in a utopian fantasy, where hopefully, 50 years down the track, these countries could somehow muster up the economies and the political will to develop their own high-speed rail networks, their own telecommunications line, their own amazing highway networks that link them to the rest of the world. We were the side that engaged with the reality in this debate. The reality that these countries had been left behind by the West and weren't able to service themselves. Given that that was the case, we told you that the BRI was the single best form of investment these countries had ever received in their history. With that in mind, there are 2 points of clash at the end of today's debate. Firstly, the impact on BRI countries, and secondly, the impact on global trade and tensions. So firstly, on the impact of BRI countries, because what was very important was to look at the counterfactual that Team Estonia presented in this debate. Because the question was, how else could these countries actually develop this infrastructure? And if they couldn't do enough to actually prove that they could develop that infrastructure, they lost the debate at that point. Firstly, we told you on whether they could develop it in themselves. We told you that they simply cannot afford it. At the point where their GDP per capita is so low that they literally cannot even service their own citizens, let alone build an entire telecommunications system that covers the entirety of the country. That was not realistic. At the point where their case was reduced to saying, well, maybe in 50 years, if their economy does develop, then they'll be able to do that. We told you that their economy develops when they have the infrastructure that facilitates it to develop. And that was what you got under our side of the house. So then they wanted to support the IMF and things like other international institutions. They wanted to support the West. The West, with through leaders like Orban and Trump, has constantly been turning inwards, which has become more isolationist and less inclined to ever care about these types of countries, of which they have no strategic interest in. Why would they want to align with the West that tries to crowbar their way into these countries and tries to get them to liberalise their economies and allow for private investment in a way that is not beneficial in any way, shape or form? We told you that the types of loans that are accepted are those which are ratified by these burgeoning democracies. The local politicians have incentives to accept the types of deals which will actually benefit their types of economies. When you have people literally running on anti-corruption platforms in Pakistan and Malaysia, that is an indication that these countries do care about their sovereignty and aren't engaging in bad deals. At the point where we told you that a vast minority of countries were ever actually engaging in it, we were quite happy to stand by these loans in this debate. So the benefit that we got was that we created jobs. We created jobs and infrastructure in these countries, both directly through the fact that many of these countries employ these workers, but also indirectly through the fact that there are many industries which build off that. Their only counter was quite a glib characterization saying, oh, well, Pakistani farmers can't be civil engineers. Well, quite obviously not all of them can, but there are people who have to work in the concrete industry. There are people who have to service that mine, quite obviously, like quite basic jobs. So quite clearly, there is a range of skills which can be led by a range of people. Then they want to say that China controls everything in these debt-to-equity swaps. Firstly, that was factually incorrect. The majority of cases don't engage in that scenario. And we allow the economies to develop and not shut out local workers because they don't have the comparative advantage in everything they produce. So secondly, on global trade tensions, what we told you was that we would decide that de-escalating one of the worst military, proxy conflicts that China has ever entered into the South China Sea. Their only response was to say that China will always care about the South China Sea. However, that wasn't the case, because 50 years ago, or 20 years ago, there was nowhere near as much of a reliance on the South China Sea. It is only now when they realise that it is only their sole way which they can get their countries and get their goods right across the world that there has been such a militarisation in the Spratly Islands and right across that area. We have decided to see when we give China alternative trade routes, both through the Arctic trade route and through ports in Guadalajara, that is how we prevent that from happening. Furthermore, we thought it was absolutely disgusting in this debate that they simply wanted to stand behind a US hegemony of global power. We told you that when you have competing global powers, you allow a country to actually choose their alignment and get the best deal. In that sense, they get better investment, they get better alignment with these powers. At the end of this debate today, we were the only side that allowed these countries to benefit themselves and advance themselves into the future. That is why we won today's debate.
I would like to thank the reply speaker of the opposition for their speech and would like to invite the reply speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
Dear panel, we don't regret China's foreign direct investments. If China wants to boost Myanmar's economy to have more trading partners, we are fine with that. What we regret from China's position is removing sovereignty and economic security from vulnerable nations. China is doing this systemically all over the most vulnerable countries that China's opposition also wants to talk about in this debate. They are going to these countries because they are so vulnerable, because they have no security nets in those countries, as opposition wants to characterize. They don't have the power to say no to China, so they can get some kind of economic benefits, and China is abusing the power it has over those countries, which is why those countries are left in debt traps that they can never get out of. We don't say that Uzbekistan or any other developing country will do their own Belt and Road initiative in 50 years. What we tell you is that in 50 years, those developing countries can't build schools for their people, can't provide water or electricity for their people, or can't create roads for their people because of the fact that China has taken the money away from them. They are left in debt, which they are constantly paying back loans to China and not given the opportunity to improve their own country and provide essential state services. Two things I want to talk about in this debate. Firstly, are they going to be economically beneficial? And even if they are economically, and secondly, even if they are economically beneficial, why we still should reject the Belt and Road initiative. Starting with the point about economy. We get characterization from China's opposition that these countries now get access to great resources and opportunities. They never truly answered the imperative that we set from China's opposition. We tell you that these loans are going to catch up with them at some point. Even if at the beginning they get these amazing opportunities, then at one point these loans are going to stop. This country will have to start paying back the debt that they have, and they won't have the opportunity to do so. They won't have this because their own economy will have been taken over. China is controlling the decisions that these countries can make, and we think that this is true in many instances. Notice that this is even more true in the instance where these countries can't $200 billion to pay for all of the loans that China has given them. This is the characterization that we give to you from side proposition. And side opposition needed to prove where they will get the same amount of money that China is giving to these countries and thus will not be taken over by China, as this is the only way they can give something back to China, the thing that China obviously wants. But they then tell us that they can refuse these things. Notice that the most analysis that we get from this is from the third opposition speech. This is why we get nuanced analysis of the politicians in those countries, analysis of the media in those countries, and why these states can reject these deals. We don't really get more like bigger responses from the first two speeches. This was material that we couldn't really engage with. But moreover, their own characterization of these people having horrible conditions proves how China can obviously influence the deals that they are made, that they are forced to take. The fact that they say that these people don't have water or electricity in their countries means that they are forced to take the deals that China is providing for them. They are forced to believe that China is the only way out, and if they want to go with that gruesome characterization, they are proving our side of this event. Finally, even when good infrastructure comes, they say that it's good when it comes from other places, but you don't have to pay for it. Except this is answered by our own case. We tell you that you can provide these services even if you have less amounts of these huge loans. Montenegro could have provided their education with more money if they hadn't taken that highway deal, and they could have made better comparatives for themselves. China forces them to take these huge loans they're never going to be able to pay back. Finally, these countries don't exist in isolation. Kyrgyzstan can do trade with Uzbekistan and other countries around them. They have other opportunities besides these loans. Finally, even if these economic benefits are true, three things. Firstly, we told you they are going to be short-term. These loans end at some point, and countries won't get those benefits anymore because they can't maintain the things that they have, the ports or the hydro plants. All of these things will run out of the money because these countries aren't getting loans from China anymore, which was the only thing keeping those infrastructure projects alive. Secondly, these benefits never go to the people. We told you how China is using its own lobby power to influence the political decisions in those countries, and even if they have economic benefits, these economic benefits will use better China. Finally, they never give analysis as to why my extension is true and why these economic benefits even exist, why China will be able to make Belt and Road so successful that it works to the fullest extent that China wants to. We think that side opposition has proven how this country will be worse off